right, what does science say about God? In order to do this, we have to go back 20 years to the O.J. Simpson trial. Can you believe it's been 20 years since the O.J. trial? 1995. You say, we're going to retry O.J. here? No. I just want to make a point about it, okay? Let's look at the evidence that was presented at trial. Some of the evidence. First point, Simpson's blood was found at the scene of the crime. There's only a 1 in 170 million chance it was not Simpson's blood. Secondly, Goldman, Brown, and Simpson's blood, Goldman and Brown were the two victims, and Simpson's blood was in Simpson's Bronco. You remember the white Bronco, the slow speed chase in LA, the LA freeway? All the blood was in the Bronco. Thirdly, the glove at the scene had blood from all three on it, and it matched the glove at Simpson's house. You remember when Johnny Cochran said, if the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit? Remember that? And the glove had dried because all the blood on it, so he couldn't put it on. Then the bloody footprints at the scene were from a rare size of size 12 shoes that Simpson owned. There was only 199 pairs of these shoes sold in the United States, and Simpson had one of them. Finally, Brown's blood was on Simpson's socks, and there's only a 1 in 21 billion chance it was not her blood, which means she was probably the only human being in the history of the world to have that blood. Now, question, does science show that Simpson was guilty? How many say yes? Science shows that Simpson was guilty. How many say no? How many don't want to answer? You know, the answer is no. Why? Not because I think Simpson was innocent, but because science doesn't say anything. Scientists do. All science gives you is the evidence. You have to gather the evidence and then interpret the evidence, and no evidence is self-interpreting. All evidence, all data needs to be interpreted. And so you can look at this evidence as a juror, as a scientist, and say, first of all, is this evidence good? And secondly, is it good? Does it point more toward guilt or innocence? A scientist has to do that. Science doesn't say a thing. Now, to amplify this point a little bit more, let's take a look at a survey about 10 years after the crime. They asked people whether they thought Simpson was guilty or not. 77% said, yep, he's guilty. But there was an ethnic divide. 87% of whites said he was guilty, but only 29% of blacks said he was guilty. Now, I say ethnic divide, why? Because there is no racial divide, because there's only one race, the human race. But there are different ethnicities. Now, why did two sets of people looking at the same evidence come to different conclusions? Because perhaps it's based on their worldview, their mindset. Blacks, understandably, were more apt to think the case was racially motivated. Why? Because maybe they had been victims of racism themselves and said, OJ's been set up. Whereas whites hadn't had that same experience, so when they look at the evidence, they go, OJ's guilty. Same evidence, two different conclusions. Why the difference? The mindset, the worldview. I submit to you this is the same thing going on when scientists are arguing over where the universe came from, where life came from, where subsequent life forms came from. It's based on an argument over worldviews or mindsets. If you're somebody who's open to God, you'll look at the evidence and go, yeah, this evidence points to God. If you're a materialist, though, if you're an atheist and you've ruled out any intelligence out there, if you think every cause is a material cause, in other words, all that exists are materials, doesn't matter how much the evidence appears to point to an intelligent being, you're going to say, nope, had to be a natural cause. You see, this is not an argument over evidence. Everyone's looking at the same evidence. You know what it's an argument over? It's an argument over philosophy or your philosophical mindset or your philosophical worldview. Because science doesn't say anything, scientists do. And you need to be aware that quite frequently when scientists interpret the data, They're actually just interpreting the data based on their philosophical worldview. They've already decided it can't be God. Why? Because they've ruled God out in advance. That's why. So the answer to the first question is, what does science say about God? Nothing. Because science doesn't say anything about anything. Scientists do. Science is just a method we use to discover cause and effect relationships. It doesn't say a thing. It's the scientists that say things, and you need to discover what their worldview is to discover how they're interpreting the evidence. Quite frequently, their worldview is interpreting the evidence, and they're not being fair with the evidence. Now,